Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Welcome to another episode of the Dr. Will Show. I am your host, Dr. Will, and today we will be talking about school leadership, school culture, and the leadership influences on that. And I am here with Dr. Johnson and Dr. Brady. And so, how are you doing today?
Fabulous.
Doing fantastic.
I hear somebody's getting help back there.
Sorry.
No, yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's interesting because we're here, and it reminds me of a scene in uh, Spies Like Us. And so they walk into the tent, and it's like, doctor, 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 doctor. And so I'm here with two doctors today. And so before we get into it, will you just introduce yourselves?
Okay. I guess I'll start since you started with my name. I'm Liz Johnson, and I have been in various levels of education for about 42 years. I'm supposed to be retired now, but I'm an executive coach for administrators. I write charter school applications, and I also teach in a doctoral program, an adjunct faculty member in a doctoral program. In my working life, I was a superintendent, an assistant superintendent of curriculum and instruction, and I've been in every demographic you can imagine, coming originally from Harlem and then to California. So I've seen every type of socioeconomic environment with students, and glad to be here, excited to be here, and working to help students achieve.
And I'm the other doctor in the room, Dr. Brady, Leighangela, as people like to call me. I am born and raised in New England, but also transplant out here to California. I have also been a classroom teacher, a site administrator, professional developer, and now I'm a district level administrator as an assistant superintendent in a North Coastal district in San Diego County called Encinitas. I'm passionate about professional development, student learning, and school transformation, particularly on the leadership side of things.
Excellent, excellent. So, welcome. You wrote a blog post a few months ago for my blog. And for those of you who hadn't noticed, they have their book in the background. I see it. And so we'll we may get into that later. But for now, let's jump into this. So there's a lot of things going on in K through 12 education. I mean, when you're talking about funding and state tests and teacher evaluation, parental support, I mean, you name it. What is your definition of 21st century school leadership, and why is it different and so critical in moving schools forward?
Well, I don't know that there's a single definition of 21st century leadership. We throw out 21st century leadership a lot, and really we're 15 years into the 21st century by now. But really what we're talking about is living in a world that is changing so dramatically from a world that we grew up in, that maybe our parents grew up in generations before us. And we now have tools and technologies and information in a way that we've never been able to get it. And so we need to now shift our focus as leaders to be flexible and engaging with this new type of information. So I think 21st century leadership is not thinking about the content of what we're trying to teach and deliver to kids, but really be focusing more on the process and being flexible as things are constantly changing around us. And when we were, thinking about this topic in preparation for the show, Liz brought up a good point about what 21st century leadership is not.
Yes, and I know that you would like us to maybe think of a definition, but I think we wrote this, our book, and are so passionate about 21st century leadership because what we saw is leaders getting funding for computers, for technology, yet nothing has changed in the classroom. Or very little has changed in classrooms, whether those classrooms come from poor socioeconomic backgrounds or even high upper middle class backgrounds. And so we were very concerned about that, because really what all of the reports say about what students will need when they become adults in the future is that they need to be innovators, critical thinkers, they need to be able to collaborate. They need to know about diversity. They need other languages. And so just having a digital device is not going to do that. So 21st century learning has to do with a thinking curriculum, we believe, and one that prepares students for a future that's going to be very different than the one our parents were involved in. And so there's a lot more things to think about when you start a school or when you transform a school into a 21st century learning environment.
Okay, so I'm glad you brought up technology because there's a lot of technology out there, and when you talk about personalized learning, blended learning, apps, and all those things, there's a lot of new sexy going on. And you mentioned that with that, you're not seeing the reform or gains that one would expect. So in thinking about that, what challenges do leaders face when they are trying to transition from what they are currently doing today to anything more innovative or more based upon, as you say, thinking curriculum that students would need to be successful further down the line?
Do you want to start on it?
Sure. Well, I think the challenges that leaders face is this change that we're experiencing is so dynamic and so fast-paced, and all this new sexy that you talk about is coming in. And a lot of times leaders already feel behind the 8 ball. They don't know where to start. They may not be familiar with some of the new technologies. They haven't seen those technologies be integrated, so they don't really know how they fit into what good teaching and learning is supposed to look like in their minds. There's time, money, resource challenges, and I think, if you asked anybody what is the one single challenge you have, most leaders would say time. But you really need to invest in the upfront to really see the payoff on the other end. And really that upfront is all about that visioning, setting a culture, understanding where you're headed, so then you could backwards map.
And I also think that the challenge is that we've put up this mantra of 21st century learning, but again, as Leighangela was saying, we haven't really drilled down into what it looks like in the classroom. What's different from the stand up and deliver teacher? What does it look like differently from that type of teacher to what it needs to be today to prepare students for a different future than we have? So what Leighangela and I did is we looked at those skills that teachers should have, those behaviors teachers should have that are different. What are the behaviors leaders need to see when they walk into classrooms, and what should students be doing differently? It's a different type of classroom. So we put together some tools and we looked and did research on this as to what businesses are saying we want students to have and what teachers should be doing to promote and facilitate that. So that's a major challenge because it doesn't come overnight. I think teachers are like, okay, you want me to be a 21st century teacher, but are you going to invest time in me and to train me how to do that? Are you going to give me feedback? And so again, just putting that digital medium in front of them, we need to invest time and money and resources in giving teachers time to kind of fit in and match and flex with this new way of teaching. And that's a major, major challenge. One last thing I want to say is many of the books that are out there give you all this theory, but they don't tell you what to practically do to set your school up as a leader to meet this new paradigm and this new change in teaching and learning.
And a lot of times when change comes down the pike, we look to the leaders to lead it. but really, what are we doing to train those leaders? And that's one of the things that we're passionate about doing, is trying to give the tools to the leaders to then bring their staff along.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because when you talk about leadership and this new technology, there are a lot of school districts who don't have my position. And so I'm a district instructional technologist, and it is my responsibility to work with teachers, coach them up, and really get them to look at the outcomes that they want in their classrooms, look at their individual strengths, and try to figure out how we can use these tools to reimagine the learning experiences for their students. But a lot of schools, you know, they'll write that big check and they'll put that stuff in their classroom. They'll go like, "All right, Miss Johnson, go get it, girl," and won't give Miss Johnson not one iota of training or direction. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad you brought that leadership up, because it's critical to have people in place to deliver that training and be able to walk with teachers along that journey. Now, once a leader embarks on this journey and says, this is the route we're going to take, and they start implementing those changes, how will they know if they made the right decision?
Well, you're talking about feedback, and feedback comes to a leader in a lot of different ways. I think, bringing your stakeholders along and making sure you have good communication about, these are the changes we are making, this is what we're expecting to see. A lot of times parents, for example, or teachers will have an understanding or an opinion of what they expect to see. And then when those changes start occurring, you're going to get a lot of feedback in the terms of comments. So it's either feedback in the terms of fear, oh, we don't know if we're doing this right, or I've never seen that before, are you sure it's going to work? But we really want to, as leaders, to continue to give feedback, get in the classrooms, see what the teachers are doing, see if it's matching that vision we've set forward, have communication along the way so that we can get the interaction with our stakeholders and say, are we on track? What do we need to adjust and be flexible with so that we can get back on track if maybe we take a wrong turn somewhere? Also, in the past, we've developed lots of tools that we can use along the way, whether it's for a quick walkthrough in a classroom or a sit down and observe a teacher, that tell us and give us data on whether or not we're seeing what we're hoping to be seeing in the classroom. But for the 21st century, we haven't spent a lot of time to update those tools. And so that's another thing that Liz and I have done. And we do have a website where all of these tools are free to leaders, where they can go and they can download them. That gives them an idea of, if you truly are looking at 21st century education taking place, 21st century teaching and learning, what should it look like and what are the outcomes you should be observing?
And if I were queen of the world and were to hire you, Dr. Will, as my technology specialist in a district, I would say to you, these are the outcomes I want to see from students. I want to see them not just using the technology to play, games, video type games, although gaming can be used for instruction. I want to see them using it to maybe communicate with students across the globe and the nation about solving problems. I want to see them collaborating using the technology. I want to see some innovations and maybe have some kind of innovation contest or fairs within the county. I want to see them speaking to stakeholders in the community about a problem like a stop sign or that needs to be on the corner using the technology. So I would say to you, Dr. Will, as you're planning the professional development around the technology, can you work with our curriculum and instructional people to train teachers how to get kids to these goals? And then we would evaluate, assess, if you will, on a benchmark basis, and at the end of the year, what have our kids accomplished? Do they look like thinkers according to habits of mind or some kind of rubric that we're looking at to say, our kids are not just bubbling in anymore. They really can explain why they're doing something or why they're researching in history. So I think leaders, as Leighangela said, they need to communicate. So the stakeholders are with them. But then the other piece is we are looking at students responding and acting and learning differently. And so if we have some benchmarks and I hire a consultant like you to come in, I want to see that we've reached those goals with our kids.
And I think that one more thing to add to that, that Liz was kind of alluding to, is that there are benchmarks along the way. And sometimes when we talk about change, we're only looking at the end result, and we forget that there are many steps in between. And so as a leader, we can't forget that when we set the bar high, if we walk into a classroom and don't see them at that level, what we need to do is compare where they are to where they were and determine where on the continuum they are and if they're headed in the right direction. Because we can be transitioning within a transformation and not having fully arrived yet.
So when a leader, and let's just say whether it be district level school, and they're looking and they're seeing some successes, but the problem becomes you have this teacher who's amazing, and then you have this one over here who's not, and then you may have this school in your district which is your star school, and then this school in your district that you wish were not in your district.
Not in our district.
Yeah. And then you start to, so when leaders look at those situations, how do they look at those successes and then be able to scale those either school-wide or district-wide, and then begin to make those successes sustainable?
When I was superintendent, one of the things that we did, and we didn't go as far as our book talks about, but we did begin a journey to get teachers to use more technology in the classroom and to look at different ways of deploying instruction. We started with our trailblazers. You always start, the ones that are at the door when you've got an innovation are the ones that want to change no matter what. How high do you want me to jump? I'll jump even farther. So you have those people, and yes, you want to train your trailblazers so that they can start to maybe inspire some others. But then you'll have people who are kind of your pioneers. And they really are good for the change process because they ask the questions that trailblazers will not. They ask those questions that could get you into trouble. And so as a leader, what I'm saying is you might start with your stars, whether it's star school or star people in the district, but then you want to create a long-range monitoring plan, and we have a monitoring chart in our book that takes a look at the next step is to work with those pioneers, and they're going to have lots of questions. It's going to be a slower process, but if you get them to believe, sometimes they can bring those, I call them settlers, along. And then those people are like, well, okay, if Mary, who has always been cautious, not as much of a risk taker as John, then they start to train others. And I have seen that happen as a superintendent. The settlers came along later, but eventually they came along. So you have to keep that vision focus in mind as a leader and not be jumping from one change to another. The last thing is your resistors, and I'm sorry, I mean, I'm retired, so I can say this. Sometimes you have to say to the resistors, you know what, this is where our district is going. 80% of our people are here. I'm going to give you all the support possible to get there. But if you're not willing, it's a choice because we need to do this for kids. So I think change is an evolving process, and you will have different people who are motivated at different levels depending on what training inputs you put in. But you have to invest in communication and in training with your people, and you also have to work with their different styles to get there. And the third thing is you have to keep that vision sustainable as well. You can't be jumping from fence post to fence post.
So those school leaders who are unsure about taking this leap, they're in traditional schools, and so for them, the lecturer, I'm in front of the class teacher, the sole proprietor of information, everything goes through me. They're comfortable with that. That is the staff they have hired, and that is how they know how to lead. And now they're being confronted with things are changing, and you're talking to them about the thinking curriculum and making those changes and giving students ownership of their learning, etc. What is your advice for them in creating that new culture of learning? And what does that look like in a new globally connected world?
Well, I think it starts with starting small. Not everybody wants to jump into the deep end of the pool. There are people that want to cruise around the pool with their drink for a little while. If it gets hot enough, they might dip their toe into it, preferably in the shallow end. If they're really hot, they might sit on the first step of the shallow end. And it might take a long time before they want to get down into the swimming. And so I think we need to be reflective. We need to do with our leaders what we are saying we should be doing with our staff, and that's starting with the culture. Building a culture where we want to look at the research. Why are we asking you to make these changes? Some people really need to understand the why before they're willing to take that risk. We need to be reflective. What did you do today that impacted students in a more positive or more meaningful way than what you did yesterday? Get to know your students. Have lunch with them. Talk to them. Get out into a business. Find out what businesses are looking for. Then go back to your school and walk your classrooms and find out and be honest with yourself. Are we doing the job that is connecting and engaging these current students we have and preparing them for that world that we're going to be sending them out to? If the answer is no, then what's that next small step that I can take to get closer? And once you take a small step and you find success, then you're more apt to take a bigger step. And really spotlighting and celebrating and sharing those successes from one school to another. No school should look the same. No leader is going to do it in the same way. But if I see Liz do something in her school and then I see Will do something in his school, it might give me an idea of what I might do in my school to then start kind of that change process happening. And I think we always need to celebrate change and celebrate the idea that we're constantly improving our practice instead of I found something that worked and so I'm going to do it forever. Looking back in the past, we see that keeping with the same model doesn't always work. And now more than ever, we need to change our model.
And I would have lots of conversations with my staff before I even started any change or asked them to be accountable to change their paradigms. There'd be lots of videos that we'd have discussions about. Staff meetings should be used as professional development. They shouldn't be used to, air the duty schedule or have all of the technical kinds of discussions. That could be done in a variety of different ways, particularly in this digital age. So lots of rich discussions about what our students need. As I said, showing them videos about 21st century learning that is happening successfully in other areas, and let them complain, let staff complain and write up the complaints on the board. Why can't we do it? What are the deltas? That first year is about communicating the journey that we need to go on and getting the buy-in from all stakeholders, not only staff, but parents, the district office, if they've got some issues. And as you're moving along towards the end of the year, you ask for the naysayers or those that have been complaining or concerned and your people who are saying, well, maybe, and then your trailblazers to come together in some kind of dialogue group to begin to set a vision for where you're going. Maybe your second year, then you start to try some things and you showcase those, you celebrate people, you find out what the support needs to be. So we see this as most change, transformational here as a 5-year journey. And this is why we wrote our book. It's very, very important is because we saw nothing out there. And I love ISTE, and we hope to maybe present there in the future, is they don't give you a roadmap to get here. And this is a huge journey because the world is, as Leighangela said so many times, is so changing so dynamically. And we are not doing justice to our students to prepare them for their futures. So 5 years is a good, solid journey and a step-by-step process. And as Leighangela said, depending on if you've got real resistors, to those that might consider it, to those that are trailblazers, you're going to have a different way of approaching some things, and we believe the chapters in our book provide you with some tools that you can adapt. We have one last thing I want to say. We have one session where we talk about assessment, and we have expert groups that are formed to practice and try some things and bring it back to the staff and say, this didn't work, but this worked. Why don't we try this? Or I've got a new idea. So empower your staff in this change process.
All righty. Now, so before we get up out of here, let's talk about that book. So what was sort of, you mentioned it along the way of sort of why you wrote the book, but when you decided, I guess, it's important for us to sit down and put this together. What was that conversation like, and what do you hope at the end that school leaders or any readers take away from it?
Well, I'll start on this one, because one of the things we didn't mention was that before Liz decided to go into the world of retirement, she was my boss. And so I had moved on to a new district, and I was getting my doctorate, and I looked up, and entering the class was my professor, Dr. Johnson. And through some of that theoretical discussion around educational leadership, we really got talking about the innovative district that Liz had led and the innovative district that I'm now in, and some of the really cool changes that we were able to accomplish and the ways we were able to move both leaders and teachers to see some of the impact on student learning. And we said, we really should capture some of these ideas, because when we were out presenting or out networking, we saw that these things weren't really happening, and it was really that people didn't know where to start. They didn't have that roadmap that Liz talked about. And so we started to do some research, just because that's what we like to do, and found we could not find anything like it out on the market. And so we said, well, it's our duty as educational leaders who care about leadership, professional development, and transformation of today's schools to take the information that we've gathered through our experience and through our research and put it together with some ideas to get people pointed in the right direction and on the right path.
And we believe that our book could really be a professional development manual, starting with, if you already know how to set really clear vision, that's fine. Then we would move on to some other things, like what should you be looking for in the classroom, so you have those kinds of tools, because to me that is huge. As I worked with principals as a superintendent, we developed protocols for what is good teaching and what is good learning, and we would go out and triads and talk about, we had some teachers who would volunteer, and we'd talk about what we saw, what we didn't see, and what they should be looking for. So we believe that those tools could be used in professional development, and principals would go out, try them out, come back with questions and those kinds of things. We have assessment tools too, because the grading structure needs to be changed dramatically in our society. We haven't even talked about that.
That's a whole nother podcast.
Yes, I know. That's a whole nother podcast about how we look at giving students A, B, C, and D grades, but there is just no teaching about how you can grow from this point to the next point. So each of our chapters is a practical discussion about how you get the staff involved, but as well how you use tools as a leader to assess whether your change process is moving in a transformational direction. So.
Excellent. Well, thank you,
thank you
for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
We need to have you back at another date to crack it on another topic. So again, I appreciate you. Excellent. I appreciate you coming to Dr. Will Show. And as always, people who are watching, when you check my blog along with the video, you'll have their bio and information and ways you can purchase the book and connect with them on Twitter as well. Be on the lookout for another Dr. Will Show tomorrow. So as always, folks, be you, EDU. I'll talk to y'all later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.